Thank you so much. Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Nick. Thank you to the Young Dems. Thank you, all of you. How many of you are students here or students somewhere? So that's about half and half, right? Interesting. Well, I'm very grateful to be here, very grateful to have this opportunity. I was mentioning earlier when I was asked in a private meeting that Connor and Nick had with some of the young Democrats here at Tufts, they were talking about my experience of being on the campaign trail. And I was saying that it is as though there are two separate political universes. One is this huge, corporatized, very moneyed structure of political organizations and media and the pundits and the money and the polls and all of the stuff involved. And then there's you guys, the American people. The voters. And I'm not that much a fan of the first, but I think you're just wonderful. And I have come to feel, being part of this process, that in many ways the system is even more corrupt than I feared, but people are even more wonderful than I hoped. And I believe that the founders of this country were onto something very, very profound when they went all the way over from power in the hands of a few aristocrats to power in the hands of the people. And yet power is not in your hands if it's not in your head. Power is not in your hands if it's not in your heart. And I feel that the American people have failed to psychologically and emotionally bond with our own power the way we need to. And in that sense, we have abdicated it to some extent. It's not so much that we have to take it away from someone else as we have to reclaim it within ourselves. So I'd like to do a little bit of an American history with you. You know, you go to therapy to hear about your family, to know more about where you come from, like what was going on with my parents, my grandparents. It helps you understand who you are. If you're Black, if you're Jewish, if you're Latino, if you're gay, there are different particular ethnic, cultural, sexual identities where you come to understand where you stand as part or at the end of a longer narrative, and it empowers you, because then you understand, oh, I understand where I am in relation to what already was, and that gives me power in terms of understanding where I should stand also and where I should be in relation to those who will come after me. We need to do more of that now as Americans. You know, the Declaration of Independence was our mission statement. It is our mission statement. And the second president of the United States, John Adams, said that he hoped that every July 4th we would revisit first principles. Now, those first principles, right now, they're written on marble walls, they're inscribed on marble walls, and they're written on parchment behind glass. But if they're not in our hearts, then they lose their moral force. And if a principle isn't within you, you know, in the Jewish religion it says every generation must discover God for itself. Every generation must rebond with democracy. And so it is important that we realize these principles die if they're not alive in us. We've all heard them, we all know what they are. But to genuinely, psychologically, and emotionally revisit them changes your life. Number one, we all know this, all men are created equal. Number two, God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness. Number three, governments were instituted to secure those rights. And number four, which is particularly juicy, is that if the government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Those are radical. America is a radical idea. Democracy is a radical idea. It has been dejuiced in our time. Now, in 1776, when a group of 56 men, most of them young, signed the Declaration of Independence, they were doing something extraordinary on this planet. They were also risking their lives to sign it, because if the British had won the war, they would have been executed as traitors. On one hand, that's where it starts. On the other hand, that's where it got gnarly. because these men who established aspirational, enlightened principles more profound than had ever been written into any founding document, 41 of them were slave owners. So that characterological dichotomy is built into the American character. It's been with us from the beginning. We're both. We are both a country that is based on the most aspirational and enlightened principles of possibility for the human being that has ever been posited. It was a light unto the nations, and when we practice what we preach, it's still a light unto the nations. And we have been, from the very beginning, and in part in every generation, including ours, the most violent perpetrators of transgression against the principles on which we purport to stand. That's our story. Now, every generation decides for itself what's the chapter we're going to write in that story. Now, if you look at the ongoing narrative of American history, we do, as the line goes, bend towards justice. But it's never a straight line either, because sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But we did respond to slavery with abolition. We did respond to the oppression of women with 2 major waves of feminism and the women's suffragette movement. We did respond to institutionalized white supremacy and segregation with the civil rights movement. We did respond to the inability and oppression of gay people with the marriage equality movement. There is a rising realization of not only the genocide and the cultural annihilation, but the continuing injustice towards Native Americans, with how many of us standing up at Standing Rock, and the list goes on. But in other ways, in our time, we're also sliding backwards. Mass incarceration means we're sliding backwards. Racial disparity in criminal sentencing means we're sliding backwards. Chipping away at the Voting Rights Act means we're sliding backwards. So our job as citizens, it seems to me, is to understand where are we in the line of history? What's happening in our generation? What's happening in our generation is not that different than what has happened in other generations. A lot of what is happening today is just the newest iteration of some very oppressive and tyrannous forces. It turns out that the American Revolution is an ongoing process. It turns out that we were very naive as a people to consider democracy a done deal. We were very naive to just consider it done, to figure it had been established, and so we didn't really need to do much. Other people would take care of all that. But when you think about it, if you don't take care of your body, can you really be that shocked if you end up sick? And if you don't take care of your relationship, can you really be that shocked if the other person leaves? And if you really don't take care of your money or your business or your schoolwork, can you really be shocked if it goes down? And that's what is happening to us. I don't believe that Donald Trump created all of our biggest problems. I believe that Donald Trump was created by these deeper problems. These deeper problems have been accumulating for 40 years. And for those of you who are young, it's very interesting about age. I'm in my 60s, and what I have learned about age, and what we all learn as we age, is that every decade is like a room in a house. And you're in the room you're in, and you're no longer in the room you weren't in before, and you're not yet in the room you're going to be in next. But every room has its own magic. Every room has its own gifts. Every room has its own power. I think the older you are, the more you know some things. The younger you are, the more you know other things. If you're young, you know what's happening now. But if you're older, you have a sense of what continues to happen and what the patterns are as you go through history. And one of the things that they talk about in mythology, et cetera, which you really understand as you get older, is that the elders in a society are the keepers of the story. So there's something I want all of you who are students now or of student age to know. It wasn't always like this. Now, I'm not romanticizing the past. I'm not romanticizing any chapter of American capitalism. But it's very important for those who weren't alive to actually experience how it was happening, to know what happened in this country in the 1980s. I know this is going to shock you, but before the 1980s, the American corporation was actually expected to care. So if somebody had worked for the corporation for decades, the social agreement was that the corporation was actually expected to care if that person had a dignified retirement. It's not like America always had moral authority in its foreign policy. It's not like America always stood for freedom and equality the way we know we're supposed to. But there was a time in my lifetime when at least the consensus was we knew we were supposed to try. But what happened in the 1980s was that a very amoral economic system got this country by the throat. Because trickle-down economic theory was the notion, and is the notion, that the only responsibility of the corporation should be financial, fiduciary responsibility to its own stockholders, even if that's at the expense of the workers, expense of the community, expense of the environment. Now, interestingly enough, Milton Friedman, who was the main articulator of trickle-down economics, he himself said, but of course this will only be safe if we have a universal basic income. Isn't that interesting? But the promulgators of it, and they got a president, and they got Senate, and they just took it was unbelievable what happened in the space of a decade. And what happened was the idea that all this money would be made. You see, this wealth inequality did not exist in the 1970s. So this massive transfer of wealth began. And the idea that all that money that would end up in the hands of the stockholders, it would all trickle down and it would lift all boats. Well, I think after 40 years, it's pretty clear the jury is in. It not only did not lift all boats, it left millions of people without even a life vest. It has destroyed America's middle class. And it has left 1% of Americans owning more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now, Louis Brandeis, late Supreme Court Justice, said, you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. Because what happens when you've got that much concentrated wealth in the hands of a few, and particularly when that concentrated wealth is mainly expressing itself politically through corporate power, what you have is a regression to an aristocratic paradigm. Because instead of the old lords and ladies of old England, now it's health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, gun manufacturers, chemical companies, food companies, oil and gas, defense contractors. They're like a new aristocracy. And here you have Abraham Lincoln, who stands on the battlefield where these thousands of men had died at Gettysburg, and he said that they died so that a government of the people, and by the people, and for the people, would not perish from the earth. I'm running for president, and I'm talking to you today because we all need to get this. It's perishing now. We have become a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, for a few of the people, of multinational corporations, by multinational corporations, and for multinational corporations. As soon as we started making the businessman God, why are we so surprised that the most twisted, perverted form you can even imagine of that image has risen up to prevail upon us? So, this is the deal. It's not an immoral economic system, it's an amoral economic system. But an amoral economic system has produced immoral consequences. I'm running on the pillars of a moral politics. One of the things I love about talking to young people is how many of you were not even born in the 20th century? Exactly. Why should you be burdened by the mistakes of the 20th century? The 21st century mind. No. Don't carry it over. That's part of growing up. That's part of growing up. It's part of individuation. What did my parents do? What did those who came before me do that I want to actually do even better? And what is it that they did about which I say that stops right here? And there are the ideas of the last 20 years of American politics is riddled with bad ideas. They need to stop right here. We need to go back to the original principles of this country and apply them for our time. We need an integrative approach to politics. This is the 21st century. We don't think of, we're a whole person approach. 21st thinking is much more holistic. It's much more whole person. You don't just address allopathically what's happening. That's what's happening. That's why we become Stepford citizens. It's a Stepford politics. They don't even, they tell us what we're even told what the issues are. Not just propagandized for how you feel about the issues, we're even told what the issues are. They tell us what the issues are. Has anybody been polled? Anybody asked you about poverty? Anybody asked you about child poverty? Anybody asked you about the military-industrial complex? I bet not. So this is the deal. I want to move through this quickly because I know that Connor wants me to put out questions and we'll talk with among ourselves. So this is the deal. First of all, obviously, and I'm not anti-capitalist. I know there's a lot of conversation about capitalism and socialism. I don't believe, me personally, I do not believe that capitalism is inherently oppressive. I don't, actually. But there is a virulent strain of capitalism, a predatory capitalism that, as I said before, corrupted our government, and it has hijacked our value system because it is completely untethered to any kind of moral or ethical consideration. So we need to get that back on track. And getting that back on track, my ideas are very similar to Bernie and Elizabeth, very similar. I'm just a left-wing progressive Democrat economically. Repeal the 2017 tax cut, put back in the middle class, stop with the corporate subsidies, like $26 billion alone last year to oil and gas. That $2 trillion tax cut, 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest corporations and individuals. You get back to the United States government the right to negotiate for drug prices. You look at the military budget, you say everything the military actually needs, they get. Everything on top of that, hundreds of billions of dollars that only have to do with short-term profits for defense contractors, that goes. You say to 3%, you say to billionaires, many of whom did make their money in a very righteous way. Good for you guys. We'd like 3%, please, on your assets. And you say to people who have 50 million or more, once again, if you made it righteously, good for you. We'd like 2% on the 50 million. We'd like that. And then what we're going to have. And I think at a time like this, it's extremely important for us to remember how many people with that kind of wealth agree with us. No socioeconomic group has a monopoly on values or concern for this country, and I think that's really important that we remember that. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard any more than every poor person is noble and pure. So we want to be careful because we have to be so deep in our own sort of purification of heart if we're going to have the kind of nonviolent revolution that we do need to have in this country. Secondly, we need to say, okay, we do all the things I just said, we're going to have some cash on hand. What are we going to do with the cash? We have millions of American children who live in chronic trauma. We have 43 million hungry Americans, 13 million of them are children. We have American children who go to elementary school and ask the teacher if you have some food for me. Last time I was in New Hampshire, in northern New Hampshire, I was told by political and business leaders there that 25% of the children in northern New Hampshire go to sleep hungry at night. We have millions of American children who go to schools and classrooms where they don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. We have millions of American children who have a form of PTSD that psychologists say is no less severe than the PTSD of a returning veteran from Afghanistan and Iraq. Their despair has simply been normalized by the political establishment. There's a reason for that, because they're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. They're no more useful to the political establishment than they are to a predatory form of capitalism. So, because how do they serve it? So whether it's young people or whether it's old people, they just get kind of dropped by the wayside. They're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage, so how can they possibly compete with the clout of the corporate forces whose money dominates Washington? We should be rescuing these children, no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. And if I'm president, that's why I want an entire Department of Children and Youth to coordinate all the efforts. We need more. This is more than educational funding, which obviously we need. It's more than universal preschool, which obviously we need. But we need community wraparound services. We need nutrition. We need to deal with the child poverty, child hunger. We need to deal with anti-bullying. We need to deal with trauma-informed education. We should have mindfulness in the schools. Ladies and gentlemen, the very fact, and everyone else, the very fact that we base our school funding primarily on property taxes is so immoral. And this needs to change. This needs to change. Because if you're a country that's the richest country in the world, which we are, and you are withholding education from anyone, that is a passive form of oppression. And remember what I said about revisiting our first principles. What about all this, God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? These children are not having their right to pursue happiness secured. The next thing we need to do is a World War II. And by the way, I want to go back to the education thing. What you have is 40% of all Americans living in chronic economic trauma and anxiety. They don't know what they'll do if they get sick. They don't know what they do if one of their kids gets sick. They don't know how they'll send their kids to college, and they don't know how they will get out of under these college loans. Cancel it all. You just cancel it all. Everybody acts like it's so complicated. You have a $1.5 trillion student loan debt. You have a $2 trillion tax cut, which we haven't even proven will pay for itself. I say cancel the loan completely. Just cancel it completely and let it, cancel it, just cancel it. This canard that we don't have the money. We don't have the money, see? It's like, no, wake up. It's like, wake up. It's like an abusive boyfriend. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. It's a lie, it's a lie. No. We have plenty of money. We just have to stop putting it in the hands of a very, very, very few people. And that will be an economic stimulus. You give it to the people. This is where money comes from. Money comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. Uncap people's dreams, unleash people's spirit. There's nobody in this room who doesn't deep in your heart want to do something great. We're born with that. And society should help you do that, and then society will be better off, including monetarily. And just wrapping that up one more time with the children, if you really want to take care of your economy 10 years from now, I'll tell you what you do. Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. Because there's nothing, there's nothing in the sky, nothing in the wind, nothing in the sun, nothing in the ground that can equal in energy to fuel what we need in the 21st century more than the brain of every child in America. That's what we should do. We're going to need a World War II level mass mobilization to reverse climate change. Nothing short of that is going to do. I think a lot of people in this room are probably very well aware of what we could be facing if we do not do that. Massive social collapse, the likes of which we have not seen in the modern era, whether it be food shortages, whether it be economic collapse, whether in crises, whether it has to do with whole swaths of continents and countries where the heat is such that the land is basically uninhabitable, you can't grow food shortages, et cetera. We're going to need a massive World War II level of mobilization in order to make it happen. The next thing I feel very strongly about is that no country any more than an individual can have the future that you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. It's time. Racism is the original character defect in the United States. The Jews, the holiest day of the year is the Day of Atonement. Catholics go to confession. People in an AA meeting, you have to admit the exact nature of your wrong. Take a fearless moral inventory. America needs to do this. Let's pay reparations for slavery. Woo! And also, along that same line, we have some reparative measures to take towards Native Americans in this country. With them, it's a more complicated issue. We're talking about unfairly negotiated treaties that we've broken, giving back the Black Hills of South Carolina, of South Dakota, obviously the pipelines, and so forth. And then the last thing, I'm sort of rushing through these because I know we want to get to questions, and then we can talk in detail about anything you want. The last thing has to do with our national security agenda, and I already mentioned it. And I think one of the oddest things about this campaign is that Tulsi Gabbard and I are the only ones who even talk about this. We have a national security agenda that is so based on constant and repeated preparation for war. That's like saying, I'll just take a bunch of medicine, but I don't have to cultivate health. Sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. And war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. But what we have as the national security agenda, just doing some math here, makes it all very clear. $760 billion a year on the military. We all know how it do twice that of everybody else just below that number. Our State Department gets $40 billion. State Department is long-term development, diplomacy, mediation. Within that $40 billion, $17 billion goes to USAID, which is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then also within that $40 billion, less than $1 billion goes to the peace-building agencies. Now, what do the peace builders do? Peace-building skill, and I'm sure there are peace builders who are in this room, peace-building skill is just as sophisticated a level of expertise as is military skill. And in some places in the world, it takes just as much courage to exhibit it. There are 4 factors which statistically prove that when they are present, there is a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. Not going to surprise anybody what they are. Number 1, expanded economic opportunities for women. Number 2, expanded educational opportunities for children. Number 3, reduction of violence against women. And number 4, amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. What do you think these people in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala were doing? What do you think some of the people who have moved have been ideologically captured by genuinely psychotic forces such as terrorists in other countries? This is what human desperation does. But for us to help desperate people does not produce corporate profits. For us to buy something like 100 B-21 Raiders for $560 million each, that all drop not only conventional weapons, but also nuclear weapons. We need 100 airplanes that drop nukes. You drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. You drop 10 of those, it's probably over for the species. Because every nuclear bomb that exists today makes the bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima look like pinpricks. But this is where it lies, ladies and gentlemen. This is where it lies. We're not even talking about it. You make me president, you better believe we're going to talk about it, and we're going to have a U.S. Department of Peace, because the leaders of the peace agencies should have an equal place at the table of power in securing our national security agenda. None of this is going to happen if it's just on the level of policy. Because in order for everything to happen that I have mentioned here, there's going to have to be an awakening of the American people. There's going to have to be a reclamation of our power. We're going to have to recognize that we, the people, are the immune system in the body politic. The body can take quite a large amount of injury and assault as long as the immune system's working. And democracy can take quite a large amount of assault and injury as long as the immune system is working. The citizens are the immune system. I think in many ways we have to take responsibility for the fact we were played and we allowed it to happen. Because anytime you think, well, somebody else is going to handle that, oh, they handled it. And now we are so off course. And we are off course in a way that other generations have been off course. I mean, other generations, however, rose to the occasion. We had slavery in this country, and a generation rose up, and they abolished it. We had suppression of women in this society, and we had a generation with the women's suffragette movement that rose up and changed that. We had segregation and institutionalized white supremacy in this country. A generation rose up and changed that. The government, in not any of those cases, decided to change things. People rose up. People rose up. People stepped in, and they caused the change. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're dealing with today is no different than any other generation. The same level of undemocratic assaults and erosive and corrosive ideas and forces that would undermine our democracy. We're not having to deal with anything any more intense than other generations have had to deal with. Let's just not be the first generation that wimps out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. Woo!